this a little shorter today. Maybe try to keep it closer to half an hour if we can. That'll meet with Bob's schedule anyway. So let's go ahead and get started here.
I apologize, I didn't send you any updates on chapters, but there were no new ones.
That's okay. I guessed correctly then.
Yeah.
Action items. I don't think anything has happened here. We don't have a candidate yet for our video concierge session for EWC. And
Sent out three on the help desk. I made the offer to 3 people.
Okay.
And then, people just are not biting, or they're not in the US, because I say, if you're in the US.
Happy New Year, Ed.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Ed. Happy New Year, Everton, too.
The last 3 action items were mine, and I have I have failed to do any of them. I've been, like I said, kind of in holiday mode here, so I will leave those on the list for me. I got to reach out to Peter Binkley about getting his models into the Blender sizing file. I got to reach out to Mazu to see if we can get models with the fully assembled hands and arms to do that, and got to reach out to Matt Botel about getting a terminal device for the kinetic hand. So that stuff still needs to be done. Just gonna leave that for now. We got our metrics on pages 2 and 3, so feel free to browse those yourselves. Nothing really stood out, pretty much typical activity levels. And so on we go to the agenda. Like I said, we're going to keep today's meeting a little shorter if we can. So we don't have any active Lumio proposals to discuss, which I think is worthy of discussion in and of itself. The whole Lumio process has been pretty dead for a while. Which I think makes it sort of brings up that discussion about having SPC have a portion of funds that we have the ability to kind of allocate and control, so that we can get things done without having to wait for somebody to propose something. I think that makes a lot of sense. So last time we talked about the SPC doing a proposal for the media coordination program. Ben, I think you sent out an email with some details which I haven't gotten to yet. Is there anything you want to talk us through there and your thinking?
Yeah, I could talk about it briefly. If I don't know if you have the ability to open up that document and share the screen, that might be easier than trying to talk about it and navigate at the same time.
Yeah, let me just find it first. So you're talking about the one that you emailed?
Yep.
Let me just find it here.
So the gist of it was to look at creating a fellowship program. The role that I've taken this past year, I've kept a pretty good documentation about the footprints that I've taken. Yeah. So this is just a one-pager, and it's something that John and I put together. So all the compliments in there about how wonderful I did were John's additions. But I guess the important part is that the idea is it's aiming for some kind of a fellowship. It's looking for outside funding using sort of this recipe. The ingredients are in bold as things that seem like they've worked pretty well in terms of having a base structure for us to use for when people contact us looking for information about recent e-NABLE activities, when people are just getting sort of on board. There's all these things that we can pull together, including the newsletter, including some of the mentoring programs that we've been piloting, John and I with Everton, or with Saif and Ricardo.
The only thing I don't see in here that we had talked about, Ben, and maybe I'm just not seeing it yet. You talk about mentoring and training here, which is good, but this is more in the context of training new volunteers, mentoring of, well, recruits maybe. What I was getting at is last time we talked about making sure that we incorporate into this program the idea of almost you replacing yourself, training people to take over what you're doing. And I want to make sure that that's the intent of this, some of this mentoring and training.
Yeah. So the 2 things that are new in this proposal in that section, the first one is in this ongoing fellowship, allow for 1 month overlap between terms for onboarding. I think ideally we would set up something that would allow the person that has the fellowship to really spend some time with the next person and give them a sense of the recipe that they've been using, what's currently being developed, what are some of the challenges. It gives the person that's completing their fellowship time to sort of put a report together, but I think it'll be helpful to do that with this new person with a fresh perspective. The big thing is I'd love for the contributions that I've been able to make to be more sustainable. And I think right now, if I said, it's been great, goodbye everybody, a lot of this stuff would be hard to replicate. So I think the goal of this is to try to set up something that is, easy to, there's no need to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, I think that's an important part of what we talked about. It looks to me like the direction that we're taking is saying, well, Ben has held this role, and eventually we're going to find somebody new to take over this role, and they're going to do all the same stuff. In my mind, I had kind of looked at it a little bit differently. Like, Ben, we've been paying you to basically build this program and this process, which you've done a great job of. You've built out all the components that you see listed here in bold. I was kind of thinking moving forward that maybe we try to not bring in one person to take over all the stuff you've been doing, but maybe try to find volunteers that would take on individual components of what you've been doing. So maybe one person takes over the newsletter, one person takes over social media, somebody takes over, chapter spotlights, something like that, where those could end up being volunteer roles. So, we were paying you to kind of build it out and get it going, and, because it was a big job that you took on, but maybe we kind of start to divvy it up amongst volunteers. That was my thinking anyway, but what are your thoughts on that?
That's a great suggestion. I think in some ways that's sort of the path that we've gone down. So I've worked with Masvi, I've worked with Evan, Blackman. There's been a number of volunteers that I've helped to sort of coordinate into different projects. But I do wonder if that coordination, so even if you had, if you imagine a volunteer working on each of these, to pull all that together might take a regular person, and it might take a person that has enough time and dedication to the whole environment to settle into a rhythm. Yeah. I think it's not out of the question to imagine that there could be volunteers. I was, in talking with John, I imagine this could be a really wonderful opportunity for, let's say, a student who could, probably a college student, right, who's specializing in, communications and would be interested in really working on this stuff. I'm not sure if it's possible to do some kind of a free co-op or internship, free in terms of for e-NABLE. Right. That's something that we could explore. Sometimes co-ops do have funding involved. I think taking a couple steps back, one thing that's unique about this project versus fundraising for the entire e-NABLE network is it's very clear what the outcomes are. And I think for sponsorship, for some of the partners that we worked with in the past, like IBM, like Red Hat, these are, or even Verizon, these are communications-based organizations. And I think for some of them, this could be a really wonderful fit, especially if it's something that's aimed at being this fellowship program that supports students, that has this open source kind of community development. It seems like it might be something that we could get some support for, independent of other funds, that would allow it to just establish itself. That's what I was aiming for.
Well, I think that makes a lot of sense. So, we're going to sort of define the need and put it out there, and we'll just kind of see what comes forward. And if we can find some volunteers to take some of this on, great. And if it ends up being that we need to have another person in a paid role, then we'll have that option on the table too. So I think this looks great. I guess the next step would be to actually put this up on Lumio, and per our recent changes, we'd have to put it out there for discussion for a week first before we set it up for a vote. But I think we should do that. Let me stop my screen share here and get back to my notes.
Yeah, I think your point though about, which isn't explicit in the document, your point about coordinating with volunteers is pretty critical. So for example, Muyan was a volunteer from California who I worked with on the BMAS website, and she helped with some other odds and ends. There's I think a need to try to figure out how to coordinate some of these volunteers together. And I think the big picture, in terms of this presentation or this proposal, the big picture is that SPC is a really great and consistent community of people, small community of people that could provide some oversight to something like this, where there could be sort of some general feedback, some general guidance, and some oversight. But having a point person to chase after some of these leads, it's, as we all know, I think, Bob probably more than most of us, people come and go pretty quick, and sometimes it can be really difficult to keep momentum in between when things cool off. When there's an initiative that comes up, it can be really exciting, and sometimes striking while the iron's hot isn't possible with volunteers. So again, I think this all really hinges on some fundraising. So the document that I shared was internal, basically, for the SPC.
Well, but
There's another one.
I think it makes a great, start for a write-up that we could put out on Lumio. I think that's our next step. I mean, let's get that written up on Lumio for discussion and see what other people think. Maybe we can always modify it to incorporate more language about, managing volunteers and things like that. But I think we get it out there. So that looks good to me. So we have here a specific proposal from the SPC that'll go through the normal discussion and voting process. I'm very confident it'll get voted up. We'll go ahead. We'll start to look for people to take on some of these roles. Looking forward, though, we also had this discussion about longer term, finding a mechanism where the SPC could have some kind of ability to allocate some of the funding from the e-NABLE fund as needed without going through the whole usual voting process. So Bob, do you remember, what do we have in the e-NABLE fund right now?
We have $30,000 that's unallocated.
Okay, so we've got 30K in there right now. We're talking about a proposal here that's $1,500 a month. And we've seen no proposals from the community for some time now. So there are things that there are no doubt could benefit the community. Some things that we talk about here that, to me, it just makes sense that we establish some percentage of the e-NABLE fund, or whatever we want that metric to be. It probably, to me, it makes sense to just have it be a percentage of the fund, where the SPC just has discretionary, authority to say, we want to fund this project, or we want to fund this initiative, and simply report that, to the community, as opposed to going through the whole, voting process. We've talked about this before, but what are you guys thinking about this? Anyone opposed to that? Does anybody have concerns with that?
I think it's necessary.
I wonder if it would be easier if we can set up a laundry list of the things that, hosting, some of the general.
Well, I think we can give examples. I don't know that we can give an exhaustive list. Yeah, I think we can give examples.
Yeah. Because that stuff's just recurring every year, and it's just basically been proven to be necessary. Yeah. So that will give a sense of what kind of general budget is involved, and
I
then
agree. I agree. Ed, it looked like you were going to say something, but you're muted.
No, I mean, I think what what Ben said there, yeah, that makes sense. That's kind of what I was going to say. I'd also second what Ben was saying about the need for having someone kind of full time on the previous thing. Just I'd second that. I think
Realistically, I think you're right. Yeah.
and it's part-time. I mean, and again, I think
yeah.
if,
Sorry,
you know,
I mean a dedicated person. Yeah.
Right. Right.
yeah, but again, aiming for a scholarship, I think, is something that's different than a permanent. It's a permanent role, but as a scholarship, it wouldn't be a specific person. I think I've been, you know, I really enjoy modeling this stuff, but I think as, you know, in support of all the different chapters, having something that's sort of a rotating thing seems like a safer bet.
Maybe. You know, my concern with that, Ben, is that some of what you do, there's a definite continuity to it and there's a learning curve to it. And while I kind of like the idea of using, you know, student interns and things like that for some things, for something like this program, man, by the time you get somebody up to speed and where they're really effective, boom, their semester's over and they're out the door. You know, now we start over again.
Right. Yeah, I was hoping that a year would be enough. You know, again, if you imagine if you are a student in, I don't know, studying communications in some college, and you apply for this program and you get it, and there's some small stipend involved with it, you'd have, you know, your courses, and this is just part-time, but you'd have all year to really soak into it, and it'd be required to go to the SPC. It'd be, there'd be this oversight to it.
Who's going to manage this within e-NABLE?
John and I had talked about having the person join SPC every week and basically be able to share their progress. So there'd be some oversight.
Yeah.
What's up?
The SPC as a group manager.
Right. Right.
No doubt.
Just looking at what we currently have.
Some individual will probably end up taking a lead on working with them one-on-one, but you know, I don't know if that'll be John or who, but yeah, mostly through these meetings. I think that makes sense.
You know, and it would be recorded and it'd be transparent and people could see what was going on. And, you know, maybe we can even set it up in a way so there could be a, you know, something in the hub where people could post comments, not just about specific outcomes, but, you know, different ideas. There could be sort of this bulletin board for it.
So I liked the write-up that you guys did. I think we should move forward and at least get that discussion going in Lumio so that we can move towards voting. Is anybody opposed to moving forward with that?
No. Sounds good to me.
So Ben, do you want to take care of that? Do you want to post that up as a discussion thread in Lumio?
Sure.
Okay, let me just grab that down. Here's an action for you.
And I think some of the, you know, I might expand it a little bit and talk a little bit about the volunteer coordination side of it.
Absolutely.
You know, Nate just joined the call.
Happy New Year, Nate.
Happy New Year, Nate.
Yep.
Nate's been doing I think a good job modeling some volunteer coordination as well. So I think, you know, in general, if we have these new member meetups, it's a wonderful opportunity to try some different things out, to get people sharing their expertise with each other, but also Nate's been working with a couple of the volunteers from those meetings as well. So I think we are starting to get a little bit more momentum, and it's going in a couple of different directions, which is great. And Nate's, I think, been doing a pretty good job working with Patrick and with Evan and a few other volunteers on a really regular basis. So there's a couple of models for that.
The new member
smoke and mirrors, Ben.
The new member meetups were a good idea. It's a good way to get people engaged when they, you know, we never did a good job in the past when somebody joins the community. They just kind of, you know, they just kind of float and don't quite know where to go or how to get started. And I like the new member meetups as a way of really kind of getting them engaged and maybe even connecting them with some specific needs that would fit their skill sets. So let's definitely keep those going.
It's kind of part of the dynamic with working with volunteers 100%. If you've got employees, they're really dedicated. Like it's interesting because the volunteers that get dedicated are so much more dedicated than any employee you could hire. But finding those specific volunteers that will take it to that level, that's a trick. And like Ben's got a good point where if you profile certain individuals who are already in college, that'll help. Working with, we've had a high school intern, and it's been more of like what you guys exactly what you were talking about, Jeremy. By the time they're on their game, it's bye, see ya, have a nice life, good for you. It's like the 2 years where you get up to that point. I appreciate that Ben thinks it's all working smooth, but there's a lot of things that don't work smooth. I think I'll put it that way. So just to be aware, whoever that person is, they require a handler when they first show up. And the way you kind of want to do it is if you have somebody already within the hierarchy that can be like the buddy system. And then you set them up with that guy to kind of get them into but not necessarily the manager of the whole thing, because it will derail other important tasks. So you need somebody that has time that can kind of just babysit this person at first, because it may be totally unnecessary. And that means they pass the test, but there's a very good chance that they're going to require a babysitter for a while.
Well, that's to be expected. So that'll be Ben in the beginning. And then if Ben ends up moving on, to focus on other things, my guess is John will take the lead there. And other than that, it'll be collectively through these SPC meetings. So I think that'll work.
If we have another volunteer who's been with e-NABLE for a while, who could do that instead of John, it'll end up being a lot. I mean, I don't know who the volunteer is yet and stuff, but it can end up being quite demanding.
Yeah.
So.
All right. So we were going to try to keep today's meeting short, just so that we can all enjoy our New Year's Day. So let's kind of start to wrap things here. I think the only other thing I want to touch on maybe before we wrap, since we're talking about funding and stuff, is maybe just touch on the Wishbone project and get an update from Ben on that. How's that going?
Sure. It's going good. So I had a meeting, I guess it was yesterday, with Evan Blackman, John, and Martin, I think, from Rochester e-NABLE Limited.
Pressburg.
Yeah, and we've been looking at digging in a little bit deeper to what's involved to set up not just a separate account, but to integrate it underneath the umbrella of the 501c3. And I think that is the right way to do it. That was, Evan is a accountant, and he was saying that, really, if you have a donate button, that is solicitation for funds. So it's probably the best way for us to proceed is to take a little bit of a step back and see what's involved. John and Martin were hesitant because they're concerned about more time involved with accounting, but Evan seems pretty open to taking a look at the books. They've had a lot of, I think, challenges in the past, just trying to keep everything balanced and automated, so it was manageable. And Evan seems like he's game to review the past activities and to set things up in a way so it'll be easier to manage going forward. So that's all great, but it does feel like taking a step back to get a wider perspective. So that's what we've been doing.
So you guys are working on it behind the scenes. It's sounding to me like we're probably still at least a month out before we see this launched. Is that right?
It might be less than that. We have a meeting scheduled for Sunday. I think the first steps are going to be piloting. Terry has some things that she wants to try out, and you have those 2 printers. So maybe what I can try to do is follow up early next week with where things are at with you, Jeremy, and we can see. It might be in the first weeks of January that we pilot something.
Okay, sounds good. All right. Well, I propose that we kind of wrap things up here, unless anybody else has anything you wanted to discuss today.
Jeremy, I just wanted to get a time in the future at some point to go over the stuff we've done with the NIOP crew since, like, I don't know, September. We've been in the warp drive, and there's we've got 20 some more devices added on, even though that wasn't this team is out of control. That's what it boils down to. But like, I've got a new badge for Bob, new logo for that. So like, I'll send that over. And but if I could have,
just shoot me an email, Nate, and let's get you on the schedule for one of these Fridays as our presenter.
I'll show you the list. It might be better if we do it in 2 shorter sessions or something like that, so we can have time in between so you guys can digest and ask questions, maybe something like that. I don't know.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
All right, everyone, enjoy the rest of your New Year's Day.
Oh, sorry. Just quickly, I was going to say, I've drawn together the documentation for how we've been running our chapter, because I mean, I mentioned in the meeting on the 27th that we are there's continued to be a pause because of the whole sensitivity around medical device regulation and Deloitte at the moment. And so our plan is to shift over to manufacturing in 3D Crowd. So having 3D Crowd be kind of take over everything that we've been doing. So I've got all of that documentation. I've kind of cleansed it. So it's just the generic documentation for that. But I'll send that over to you now, just to give you that. Yeah, just to keep everyone in the loop so you can see the process that we're going through, all of that sort of stuff. It was just, I thought we had it written up in a kind of generic way, but it wasn't. It was all on Microsoft Teams and it was all in like wikis and stuff. So I've put it into documents now. So I'll send that over to you. I'll send that over to you right now. But yeah, that was just so we can discuss that at a later point. But I know that was an action off the back of the 27th that I needed to get done. So yeah.
Sounds good.
Cool.
All right, guys.
Cheers.
Good to see you all. See you next time.
See you.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Bye.